Hello, everyone. Welcome in to another episode of the Payne and Drain Show. And this is weird because the Lions season's been over for a couple weeks now, but there is no shortage of Lions topics to talk about and football topics in general. So, welcome into the show. My name is Zach Payne, joined with me, as always, Alex Drain. Alex, how are we doing now that we really don't have any Lions stuff to look forward to?
Uh, Pretty good. Through conference championship weekend, it's not really the results anyone wanted, except for a few people that are, I guess, fans of the Kansas City Chiefs. But oh well, it is what it is. It was still a very good football game on Sunday night, which gave us plenty to talk about. We'll leave it at that.
Well, and we will talk about it. So, today's show is going to be formatted a little bit differently than our regularly scheduled content as we don't have Lions games to cover. So, we're going to start out talking about the championship weekend. Then, we're going to get into the litany of Lions news that has come out over the last week regarding their coaching staff. And finally, we are going to wrap up with a 2024 season recap on the offensive side of the ball. And we'll recap the defense next week as well as give a Super Bowl preview. So, to start out with, Alex, as you mentioned, this was not the result anyone was looking forward to. I think America definitely lost on Sunday. And to start out with, Commanders Eagles. The Eagles run all over the Commanders, who suddenly looked very undisciplined, very contrary to what they looked like against the Lions and Bucks. What on earth happened in this game?
Well, the Commanders made a lot of mistakes that they didn't make against the Lions, which is a bummer because if they had played that way, the Lions, even with the performance they got from Jared Goff, might have had a shot because their defense needed help and the Commanders put the ball on the ground a lot in this game. And the Commanders' offense, to me, was doing fine against the Eagles. I thought they were having a pretty good game. Their first drive was a really Army-style drive, 18 plays, just grinding it out. It was a little odd to me that they ended up kicking a field goal on that drive on 4th and 3 after they had gone for it on 4th and short twice previously. But you watch that drive and you're thinking, okay. And then they give up a quick touchdown to the Eagles. Their next drive, they fumble it away. Eagles score a touchdown again. It kind of felt like it might be over, but then they ended up getting back in the game, scored a touchdown, went for two to try and tie it, and didn't get it in the second quarter. And they were hanging around, but every time they made a push, they turned it over. And all the offensive success they had in this game, particularly in the early going, at the end of the day, they had 4.5 yards per play, but score effects, fourth quarter wasn't quite the same as the rest of the game. Offense was humming for a lot of this game. They didn't have to punt that much. The problem was the turnovers set them back, gave Philadelphia shorter fields, and then what was fairly predictable is the struggles to contain Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, and it really felt like this game pretty quickly was not looking good for the Commanders. You have that 18 play drive to start and just a very confusing decision to kick a field goal, as you mentioned, very contrary to what the Commanders had done all season. And then Saquon Barkley, first carry, 60 some yards to the house. That really just set the tone for what this game was going to be. And look, everything went wrong on that first Barkley run. The toss to the outside went completely away from the Commanders' five-man front because they tried to play a bit heavier up front and in the box. So the Eagles decided, let's go around it. Saquon's fast enough to get to the edge before any of the Commanders' front seven players can get there. Very bad open field tackling by the DBs. And that's going to happen. Like, Saquon is just, he's too explosive. He's too evasive that if you don't wrap him up in the first 5 yards and you let him get to the second level, he's going to burn you. There's really no way around it. And his first two touches in this game were touchdowns, which I don't know what else you do, man. Like, he's just too good. And it's going to be a very interesting showdown for the Chiefs, but we'll get to that in a second. Now, I will say, coming into this game, the storyline for the Eagles was, yeah, they're winning, but in order to beat either the Bills or Chiefs, their passing game was going to have to take a step, was going to have to show a little bit more because it didn't look like a Super Bowl caliber passing game. Did you see enough from the Eagles passing game to give you confidence that they could get it done in the Super Bowl?
I saw more, definitely. A.J. Brown, 6 catches, 96 yards, and a touchdown. Goddard, 7 catches. Devontae Smith, 4 catches. They got those guys involved. And Hurts' final line, 20 of 28 for 246 and a touchdown, looks pretty good. I have concerns, though, about them going into a matchup with the Chiefs because the Chiefs' defense is a lot better, in my view, than the Commanders' defense. Commanders' defense, not a big fan of it. And the Lions drove all over them the prior week. They put up over 500 yards. It was the turnovers that was the issue. The Commanders don't have a good run defense to contain the opposing run game. And Marshawn Lattimore's kind of gotten thoroughly cooked this playoffs. So they weren't offering a ton of resistance, and so the Eagles were able to take advantage of that. I thought it was an encouraging performance, but it's also just kind of hard to know and compare it to a much better quality of competition. And the Commanders, to their credit, they did kind of get bulldozed defensively in the first half, but they got a couple stops in the second half, forced a couple punts. And like I mentioned, they, even through all of the issues, they turned it over twice. They still had the ball late in the third quarter, down 11, get a score there. Suddenly, you're right back in the game. One score, plenty of time to play, and they fumbled it again. And then the game kind of unraveled after that. And I think it was a better effort from the Eagles' offense, but also you only know how you don't know how much to put into the performance when Will Shipley ends up with 77 yards on the ground, including a 57-yard run. So that's kind of the caveat there to me.
Now, as you mentioned, Lattimore, bit of a tough playoffs. This week it was AJ Brown and him going at it back and forth. Now, ref ball was a bigger conversation in the Bills Chiefs game, which is unfortunate, but we'll have to talk about that in a second. But in this game, it became a conversation for two reasons. First of all, just focusing on these two, AJ Brown, Marshawn Lattimore, they were going at it a good chunk of the day. And there was one play on the goal line in particular in which AJ Brown rips off Lattimore's helmet. And Lattimore is obviously going at him too, but Lattimore is the only one who picks up a penalty. Now, I don't know. Do you have a take on what happened in that whole sequence there?
Not particularly. This was a chippy game, definitely. These two teams, you got division rivals playing for a trip to the Super Bowl, so you kind of expected some tempers to flare. But I didn't have anything particular to say about that. Did you have a broader take?
Not broader. I just thought that it definitely seemed like the refs. I don't know. I don't get how you only punish one player there when they're
Yeah,
both guilty of the same thing, and it just puts the Eagles on the 1 yard line and for the 2 point conversion. And I think they actually stopped the tush push that
they
time.
stopped
But
them. Yeah, yeah.
now
Which
that
we do have to talk about that really quick. The
yeah.
tush push sequence
So
late
that's what I was gonna get
later
to
in the
next.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Commanders are or the Eagles are driving again. Eagles get down to the like 2 yard line. Frankie Louvu, in just out of pure desperation, does his best Troy Polamalu impression and tries to jump the snap over both lines, and the Eagles didn't snap the ball, so encroachment, offsides, and that puts him down to the 1. He does it again, so the refs say the player has been notified that if this behavior persists, he will get an unsportsmanlike conduct. So the Eagles on the half-yard line go up to the line. A different player jumps off sides, at which point the officials announce that if the Commanders keep doing this, they will award a score to the Eagles, which I didn't even know was possible. I didn't know the refs had the power to just give touchdowns. That changes the game for all of you that are conspiracy. The league is rigged for the Chiefs. But yeah, just an absolutely hilarious sequence. So, first things first, focusing on this sequence in particular, what were your thoughts on the officials and just the rules surrounding that? And then we'll get into the tush push itself in a second.
I had never seen that before. at least the threat of awarding a score. I really wanted to see it happen after they announced it. Reading through the box score here, or the game summary, is very funny because you just see successive plays of penalty, 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 penalty of the exact same play over and over again. It was surreal to watch, but I will say, even though it seems strange that the referees can award a score, it makes sense
Hmm.
because if you've got a team that is intentionally impeding a play from happening and it's on the 1 yard line in that sort of situation, you do kind of have to have something there, but certainly had never seen that come up. Um, and it was kind of interesting that Washington was, doing all that because they had pretty good success against the tush push overall in this game.
Hmm.
They weren't getting because they'd stopped the previous one at the goal line, and they hadn't, it wasn't. Sometimes you watch the tush push, especially when they first started doing it with Jason Kelsey, and it would get like 3 yards. They were keeping it right to the goal line, so I didn't really understand why they needed to keep doing that over and over again. But the game was already pretty much out of hand at that point. That was after the third Washington fumble, so it was 11 points, and the Eagles are on the doorstep. If they had awarded a score, I don't think it would have changed anything. It would have been funny to watch, but definitely an odd sequence, that's for sure, and I think something we'll probably remember.
Yep. And now the other part of that is the tush push itself. Now, there has been a long debate over the last few years over the validity of the play's existence and whether or not it should be banned. I did see a interesting sub debate occurring after this game that maybe it doesn't need to be banned, but we need to punish the Eagles when they actually line up illegally, because what they do on the tush push that allows them to be so much more successful than other teams at it is their offensive line. They lean forward a lot more over the ball. Their center in particular will have his head practically over the ball. Whereas on a more traditional play, the center is a little bit more leans back, ready to, to get into his pass protection set. And on the tush push, the Eagles are all practically in the neutral zone. They're all practically over the line of scrimmage. So, what are your thoughts on the tush push in terms of where it should be in the game going forward?
Well, I kind of feel like to some degree it's lost a bit of the luster, as I mentioned that there was a time there when it felt completely unstoppable and they were able to just grind out a few yards every single time they did it. Their efficacy of it has reduced some, but obviously they're still the best, as we saw in the Bills game, which was a major talking point. Their version of the sneak really was not working. I think as the efficiency of the play has declined, calls to totally ban it are starting to fall, at least to me, a little more, seem a little more superfluous, like not something that's necessary in the game at the moment. But obviously, any attempts to sort of lean forward or manipulate the line of scrimmage should be enforced on offense because they enforce it on defense. We see a lot of times the opposing team get called for lining up off sides on the sneak tush push sort of variation of plays, particularly at the goal line. So if you're going to police the defense for getting into the neutral zone and encroaching to try and stop it, you got to go the other way as well. And we'll see if they do decide to crack on down on that, and if that would change anything if they do go that route.
Yeah, because we've talked about this with the pick play for wide receivers,
Yeah.
where it's one thing that offensive players can't do, and coaches are already starting to figure out the loophole. Just do it within 1 yard of the line of scrimmage. For the tush push and just QB sneaks in general, there's such an inherent advantage for the offense because they can just have three people behind the quarterback pushing him, and the line kind of just has to gain half a yard, because usually for fourth and inches or goal line scenarios. So the defense is already at such a disadvantage. Why are we making it impossible for them, or borderline impossible? Like, as you said, teams are getting better at it, particularly against non-Eagles teams. But the Eagles in particular are the most egregious offenders of the neutral zone on offense rule. So just enforce the rules, because there is definitely a path to the tush push being fully regulated and normal, and teams use it as they see fit, but also it's not completely broken to the point where the Eagles just get every third and short is an automatic first down pretty much.
Yeah, there was a time when that was absolutely the case. I mean, it was
Mhm.
just automatic. And But that's kind of how it goes, right? Like you come out with a new play, and then it works so much, people start overanalyzing it and nitpicking, and they
Mhm.
find the small illegalities of it, and then the refs crack down a little bit, and the other teams start to experiment with ways to stop it, and eventually it comes back down to earth. So it's not a crisis of football like some of the discussion around it was when they first started doing it a
Yeah.
couple years back, and that's natural.
It's the same thing with like all new rules and new plays. It just needs a little bit of fine tuning to find its place in the game to where it's not as controversial. But aside from that, Jaden Daniels, I thought he played fine, but his team kind of let him down around him. Terry McLaurin, same thing. He had that one really nice touchdown to kind of bring the Commanders back within striking distance. Ultimately, that just didn't go their way. But aside from that, do you have any other takes on this game?
Oh, not really. I mean, Daniels was great, over 300 yards of total offense here between the passing and the running. He was his team's leading rusher. Says a lot about where the Commanders kind of were. Defense performed about as I expected. If they don't put the ball on the ground as much, it would have been a much closer game. Eagles still probably would have won, but kind of got robbed of a more competitive game as a result of those mistakes. But nice season for the Commanders. The only final thing I have to note about this game, though, when we talk about the Super Bowl preview next week, Zach Ertz, Detroit Lions legend, 11 catches, 104 yards in this game. Next week, the Eagles got to face Travis Kelce, so something to chew on there.
I think Zach Ertz might be the Adam Thielen of tight ends, where he's just there. He just makes plays, but no one really cares because they kind of think he's washed, and maybe he is, but he's still kicking around doing stuff week in week out.
Yeah, just an interesting matchup to note because it just felt like, and the box score certainly reflects it, that every time Jaden went to throw, he was throwing at Ertz, and Ertz was open a lot of the time. So Eagles
Yep.
gonna have to key in on that as we look ahead in over the next couple weeks.
Now flipping over to the AFC, where tight ends were a conversation for a different reason. The Bills and the Chiefs. The Buffalo Bills are about as successful against the Kansas City Chiefs as they are in the Super Bowl. They've now lost four straight playoff games to the Chiefs, four straight to Mahomes and Andy Reid. It like just right off the bat, are the Bills just like cursed?
I do think that there is a mental element now, and that happens, right? It's
Hmm.
why when you have teams that get in the playoffs, I said this last year about the Lions, as much as we bemoan the NFC Championship game fiasco and now the loss this year, I still felt it was really important that this group, first time they got in the playoffs, won a playoff game and got that monkey off their back. You always want to avoid opportunities where there's the possibility that you will fall in the Toronto Maple Leafs hole, and you just self-impose this barrier that becomes a problem that your team can't get over, right? And the Bills, the first time, okay. Second time, uh-oh. Third time, it becomes a problem. Fourth time, it is the narrative of your franchise. And that's why you just got to break through at some point there, or else it will become a big problem. And I mean, I think it's a problem with the Ravens too. They don't see the Chiefs as much, although they
Hmm.
blew a great chance to beat them last year. I kind of just wonder at this point if the team to stop the Chiefs in the AFC is going to be like the Chargers or someone down the road, right? Some team, maybe the Bengals reemerge, but a team that isn't these guys. Someone that hasn't really been facing the Chiefs in the playoffs, or in the Bengals' case, had success once upon a time. A team that isn't dominated by this curse. And maybe it's the Patriots with Drake May. I don't know. Someone who has no losing relationship with Mahomes and the Chiefs, because the Bills now are just buried in it, and they're buried in it not just because of the losses on the field, but as Bills fan friend points out constantly, the Bills traded down to give the Chiefs Patrick Mahomes. They trade down again this past draft to give the Chiefs Xavier Worthy. Why do they keep doing this to themselves? It's not just the on-field results. The Chiefs own this franchise, and I don't know what's going to break them out of it. It's a bummer, but it's indisputable at this fact.
I'm pretty sure the only two quarterbacks that have beaten Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs are Joe Burrow and Tom Brady. Like, what do you do? What do you do? Joe Burrow is literally the only active QB that has beat these guys in the playoffs. So I don't know, like you said, there's obviously a mental element. I'm not going to harp on teams like the Texans, who just, it's just a worse team. But the Bills and Ravens, I don't know, like, how many years do we have to come into a season being like, will this be the year that one of them beats the Chiefs, or anyone beats the Chiefs? And how many years do we have to watch the Chiefs go into the AFC Championship against one of those elite teams and just it's going to be a close game, and then at the end the Chiefs are going to win every single time because the Chiefs just do not lose close games. It's impossible.
Yeah, I tweeted about this after the game that it feels like the Chiefs in the playoffs. And by the way, this game confirms what some people I was talking to were thinking all year, which is that the Chiefs just are coasting in the regular season and don't really care. Their offense looked kind of bad for large stretches of this year, and then Mahomes shows up and he had what 98th, 99th percentile EPA per dropback, something like that in this game. I saw that stat online. So hard to take whatever they do in the regular season seriously. But, returning to the original point, the Chiefs in the playoffs just feel like you have to be perfect and to beat them. You have to just do everything. And the thing it reminds me of as a tennis fan is when Novak Djokovic and before that Nadal, especially on clay, or Roger Federer in his prime, were at their peaks in 5 set matches at major tournaments. You had to do everything right. First set you win, doesn't matter. Win the first 2 sets, doesn't matter. First 2 sets and a break up in the third, doesn't matter. You had to kill them. Absolutely had to. It was not over until the end. You could not make a single mistake. You show up confidently in command of the match. One bad service game, it opens that door, and here they come. And it felt like you had to, destroy all 10 Horcruxes, right? In a Harry Potter reference. Like, that is what it took to beat those kinds of players at their peaks. And it's kind of what it feels like with the Chiefs. Like, you have to be good on defense. You have to be good on offense. You cannot make mistakes. You cannot have bad penalties. You can't turn it over. You have to finish the drive. You have to be the team with the ball last in the game. Like, it just they have so many ways to beat you. And the Bills made too many mistakes in this game. They weren't the team with the ball last. They had some issues on 2 pointers and short yardage, and that was really the big story for me in this game.
Well, and to speak on that, the Bills, they could have had the ball last. They had the ball with just over or at the 2 minute warning, and 4th and 5, and Spags, once again putting his bid in for the Coordinator Hall of Fame, dials up a corner blitz with, I believe, Trent McDuffie that just completely bamboozles the Bills' offensive line. Josh Allen is immediately running for his life. He hucks up a prayer, and it falls perfectly into the arms of a waiting Dalton Kincaid. The only problem was he didn't make the catch. And look, this is the Bills were on the beneficiary side of this. A week like against the Ravens, Mark Andrews drop an inexcusable drop on a 2 point conversion. I will say the Andrews drop was a lot more inexcusable than this Kincaid one. That being said, the ball hits you in the hands. You got to make the catch. That's a brutal way for the season to end, especially when there's so much just emotional history with the Chiefs for the Bills. Like it's just another heartbreak in the playoffs against the Chiefs. But they just didn't execute.
Yeah, and short yardage was a huge, huge problem in this game for the Bills. Well, first of all, the start of the game was bad for the Bills, and
Yeah,
that's a big story to me. They get the ball first, they have a terrible first drive, go 3 and out and punt. There was almost an interception on that drive. They
almost
give it over
twice.
to the Chiefs. Yeah, almost twice. Give it to the Chiefs. 9 plays, 90 yards, touchdown. Almost no resistance on that drive. And at that point, midway through the first quarter, I felt like when the Bills got their second possession, they had to score points or the game was over. Like they were in trouble right off the bat, and they drove decently, got a field goal. Okay, they're in the game, and then Kansas City was driving on them again. They get the fumble, and that got them into the game. But if they don't get that fumble, this may never have been a game to begin with because it was just way too slow of a start. And then they got into the game, seemed like they were in some trouble again in the second quarter, fall down 21-10. But then they come back and They have two-point conversion plays. One on the 21-16 would have made it 21-18. Then another one that would have made it 24-21. They did not get either of those, which is not great. And then arguably the biggest drive of the game. I'm not even going to talk about the drive that they had late to win the game. I'm talking about the one where they were up 22-21 with the ball. Chance to get some cushion, take full command of the game. They drove into Kansas City territory. They had a 3rd and 3, short little pass to Kincaid. He comes up just short of the sticks. There was some concern about the spot there. I thought it was a fine spot. Watching it again, he was really close. They spotted him about a foot away. 4th and 1 from a foot. And maybe he got it. Maybe he didn't. Probably did. Got a bad spot, but it was 4th and a foot, and you got a 6'5", 200 whatever pound quarterback who is a mule. You can't make it so close that it's up for a questionable spot, right? Like 4th and a foot with that size quarterback needs to be a full yard past the down to gain there, and they left it in the hands of the referees, and controversy struck there. But that was the second time, or maybe third time. There were sneaks earlier in the game. The sneaks were getting them nothing, and they went back to it in a big moment, turned the ball over right around midfield, and from that moment forward, it was hard to not think that it was over for the Bills. Like that was their. I know they had a chance late to tie it or win the game, but that was the moment where it turned. They had the game in good position, driving into KC territory, and they got stopped on 4th and a foot.
Yeah, and look, as you mentioned, the sneaks were very not very effective for them. There was the one where Josh Allen dove over the pile and then fumbled it back into his own arm, like the Bills recovered. Like
Yeah.
that we should have known at that point that the Bills were really playing with fire. But to talk about the controversial one, I think two things are true, or well, more than two things. But as you said, it maybe was a bad spot, and that it probably should have been a first down. That could be true. Don't make it so close that a bad spot can completely ruin you there. And also, why does the NFL not invest in putting a chip in the football and putting it like the technology exists? It's a very avoidable situation. Just invest in the technology.
Yeah, and with the spot, this was a familiar play to Michigan fans with the famous JT was short play, where you get this like uh, obsessive replaying of a parallax situation where people are like, "There's the ball, there's the line," but it's like the camera's tilted. It's it's not down the line. You take the down the line cam, you see his body right on the line, but you don't see the football. And I think it's in his right hand, which means he's probably there, but it's really close. And as I said previously, 4th and a foot. Just get past the first down substantially. That shouldn't be that difficult. I don't know why they went back to the sneak when it wasn't having a ton of success. To me, QB power makes a lot more sense there, but whatever. Play action QB power. I don't know. Do something that is gives you some options, right? I mean,
The Chiefs
it
had
just
that
it.
play where it's the play action rollout and Mahomes can
Yep.
either throw it, pitch it to the running
Yep.
back, or just take it himself. What's so
Jaden
complicated about
Daniels
that?
against the Lions
Jaden
works
Daniels against the
perfectly
Lions.
against us.
Like I
Yeah,
don't know
I
what it's not complicated.
oh, so it just that one just kind of got away from them a little bit, and then as you mentioned, they do still have a chance to come back, 32-29. They take the ball with 3:33 to play, and kind of sitting there thinking, okay, this needs to be it. Final drive right here. Either we score to send the game to overtime, we turn it over, or we get a touchdown right at the end of the game. You can't kick a field goal with a minute left here. Like it needs to be use the clock or turn it over. They got out towards midfield. There was one other play I didn't really like here. It was 3rd and 10 right before the 4th down. They throw a kind of a bubble screen, sort of a quick screen out to Amari Cooper for 5 yards. I didn't love making the 4th down more manageable. If you're at 3rd and 6 and you throw that to get 4th and 1 or 4th and 2, I get it. But I don't know if 4th and 5 is a big enough distinction versus 4th and 10. And when I've got Josh Allen, I'd rather just let him have 2 shots to just
Mhm.
gunsling and pick up the first down rather than burning a play that has no real chance of getting the first down. And it turned the game into a one last crack at it sort of thing. Even though, yes, they had the timeouts, the game wasn't technically over. It was over when they turned it over. They were not getting a stop on the Chiefs. And a fabulous play call from Spagnuolo. They had trouble diagnosing the blitzes a lot in this game. Had a lot of unexpected rushers were coming at Allen's face. I don't know if you have a take or saw the Ben Solak um, discourse on Twitter about this one.
Oh man, it's gotten so out of hand. It's gotten
Yeah,
so out of
so
control.
if you, listener, not on social media, Benjamin Solak, I think, is he ESPN now? I don't,
Yep.
or maybe
ESP
he's the ringer. Okay,
used to
ESPN.
be the Ringer, now he's at ESPN.
Yeah. All right. So he diagrams the play with that fancy software, and at face value, showing us the diagram of the play is fine and useful. Showing us what situation was, showing us that the orbit motion route they had to the left side was very open, that they've run that play before. So that's useful to know. However, he seemed incensed and baffled that they didn't throw to it, and it was pretty clear why they didn't, because there were 3 unblocked rushers within what, a half second of the snap. And Allen immediately had to roll. He rolls the opposite way of it. Just wasn't viable. The only way it was possibly viable to hit that guy in the flat is if it was his first read and the point of the play was to just take it and throw. My understanding of that play, having watched the other times they ran it, is he drops back, he waits a minute because it's kind of like a swing around route. Like you have to wait for him to do it, and with the way he hikes the ball, it's very clear that it wasn't like a split second immediate read. That he was supposed to look around a little bit and then go down to it if it's there. And with the rushers, it's just not feasible that he's going to find that. And at the end of the day, despite the rushers in his face, he made a phenomenal play. And he got the ball somehow into a situation that was catchable. If it's caught and the Bills win the game, it would be regarded as one of the great plays of Allen's career, maybe the greatest play of Allen's career. Absolutely salvaged a disastrous situation, and Kincaid didn't make the catch.
Which, look, it just sucks, but you just didn't execute. The only argument to throw it to Shakir there is if they had either diagnosed the blitz pre-snap or if
Mm-hmm.
Allen just happened to roll left instead of right. The As you
Yep.
said, it wasn't his first read, so that's not where he's going to go with the ball. And look, even the fact, like, if you look at the diagram, Shakir, yes, he's open, but he's 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage. So by the time you get the ball to him, there's a DB in the area, and you're relying on Ty Johnson to have the discipline to wait until the ball is caught before he blocks the defender, or you risk an offensive PI. And like, it's just, look, Benjamin Solak, he works at ESPN. He's pretty well respected. A lot of people are coming for his neck right now, and a lot of the criticism is over the line, but I don't know. If you want to be a film analyst online and you've never played football, you're gonna open yourself up to some scrutiny. So I don't know.
Yeah, he is a guy that seems like at times thinks he knows more than he does, which is something that I always try to check myself on. So I think it's a handy rule for anyone analyzing pro sports if you're not a pro athlete. So
Mhm.
um, anyway, definitely a funny little saga there. Other thing to note about this game, not just in the Chiefs owning the Bills from draft trades, but arguably the biggest villains of this game for the Bills are their most recent first round picks, which is not a great look for Brandon Beane. Kaiir Elam was a first round pick and got cooked all day long by the
Mhm.
Chiefs offense. The cornerback, and then I think it was what, the 2023 first round pick was Dalton Kincaid, who drops the pass. So not great. Not a
Sam
good
Laporta
day.
catches that pass. Is all I'm saying.
What about Michael Mayer?
He probably also catches it. Honestly, like I don't know. Michael Mayer is just, I kind of feel bad because he was a super highly regarded tight end prospect, and he's going to have to move on from the Raiders when his rookie contract's done if he ever wants to live up to it, because they immediately decided, well, I mean, rightly so, to invest in Brock Bowers, which completely buries Mayer's ability to stand out in that offense. But he's still a very good, he was a good prospect. And I'm sure he's still a good player.
Yeah, and some of the Bills people I know are want to see some change, whether it's with McDermott or with Brandon Beane, the general manager. I Both guys have been clearly successful to some degree at building this team up. I'm getting to the point that I wonder if it might not be a bad idea to make a coaching change, not because I think McDermott's done a bad job, but because at some point, got to try something different.
Mm-hmm.
And after 4 losses to the Chiefs, right? Like, remember Andy Reid in Philly? Like, hindsight says they should never have let Andy Reid go because he's one of the greatest coaches of all time. But eventually, you just kind of need something fresh. And I wonder if they look at that at some point in the next couple seasons, because again, McDermott's done a fine job, but coaches are hired to be fired, and maybe at some point, a fresh set of eyes and just someone else who can bring some new swagger or confidence to a team that just doesn't have it in the biggest moments.
I think it would take a pretty notable like veteran coach to become available. I don't think there's a justification to get rid of McDermott for a rookie head coach.
No.
But if I don't know, like I don't know who that guy would be, but if a veteran coach with a pedigree became available, I think that's when you could see a move happen. But as you said, Bills are cursed, so Chiefs Eagles in the Super Bowl. No one wanted this. Hopefully Bane blows up the stadium, I guess. I don't have a lot of options there. Do you have any last thoughts on this game?
This is the worst Super Bowl from like interest in the teams sort of thing that I can remember. The only one that almost happened but didn't, that would have been worse than this, was when the Packers were excruciatingly close to playing the Patriots in the Super Bowl back in 2014-15 when the Packers choked away that NFC Championship game against Seattle. I remember watching that game and
That was
just
great.
being like, if the Seahawks don't win this game, I'm not watching the Super Bowl. Like, the Patriots hadn't even won their game yet, but they were going to win their game. They were playing the Colts, who were not very good. And so I'm
Was
just
that
like,
Deflategate
yeah,
year?
man. I think that was. Yeah, it was 14-15. It wasn't a super competitive AFC title game, but I was just like, if the Patriots play the Packers, I will do something else with my Sunday. Like, I just can't. But this is also pretty bad. Thankfully for us, the Eagles aren't our rival. So if they
Yeah.
win, I won't. I don't hate the Eagles like a lot of people seem to. I don't have this deranged issue with Philly fans like people seem to have. My only thing with the Eagles is I don't like that they keep being gifted really favorable paths to the Super Bowl. I also don't love that they're the extension of the Georgia Bulldogs football program, which is not my favorite college football program for reasons related to their record driving automobiles. We'll just put it that way. Um, but besides that, eh, I'm not happy the Eagles are there, but it's not the Packers at least. So
If the Eagles win, I'll be happy for Saquon and Howie Roseman because Howie Roseman deserves a Super Bowl ring. But I can't say I'll be very happy for the rest of the roster or their coaching staff. So, but if the Chiefs win, I'm happy for even fewer people because you've already won. I don't care. So I don't know. Like there's a lot of people who are just like, you know what? I don't care. I just want to see the halftime show at this point. Like we'll watch Kendrick called Drake, yeah, something I can't say on the internet. And
hey,
we'll
some people watch the Super Bowl just to watch the commercials, or at least they did when
true.
I was younger. Maybe that's faded, but that used to be a thing too. So there's a lot of reasons people watch the Super Bowl.
As a Canadian fan, there used to be this whole thing about getting off of a Canadian channel so that we could get the American commercials for the Super Bowl. So that like there's always fun reasons. But anyways, moving on, we'll talk about the Super Bowl next week. Now we have a lot of Lions news to get through. Now I'm going to go through this in order that it happened. We talked about Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn last week. I guess Aaron Glenn officially got hired after we released the episode, but
Yep.
I mean, we did talk about what his departure would mean and what he brings as a head coach. So we're going to skip past those two. So, first, Hank Fraley got interviews to be an offensive coordinator. I think he had two interviews in Seattle. He ends up staying in Detroit and he gets the a little promotion to offensive line coach and run game coordinator. And we could just kind of do quick takes. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, it was the rare time that somebody's like, "Oh, my third cousin lives next to so and so and says this," was actually right because there was a Detroit talk radio person that was like, I don't remember, it was like my neighbor is Hank Fraley or my brother's neighbor, whatever. And it's like, he's not going anywhere. I heard this last night. And then it turned out to be true. So that's cool. Um, Obviously, Fraley is a big part of the Lions team. And the quotes at the locker cleanout day, particularly from Frank Ragnow, where he was talking about like holding Frank Fraley hostage and like spreading like blackmail material to get teams to not hire him. It's pretty humorous, but does speak to how highly he is regarded. The Lions have done good work on the offensive line over his tenure, so they want to reduce the turnover as much as possible. There's going to be substantial amounts of it when you lose both coordinators, so I think it's imperative to try and keep the assistants in line as much as possible. And if promoting Fraley to run game coordinator is what it took to keep him around, I think that's probably a good decision.
Yeah, like look, he's been responsible for the development of Taylor Decker and Frank Ragnow and Panay Sewell and Graham Glasgow. Like he is one of the better offensive line coaches in the entire league. He has been very highly regarded for a long time. I know Eric Schlitt over at Pride of Detroit always says build Hank Fraley a statue. So look, he's well known in the Detroit fandom because he does a great job. And so losing him would have sucked. And instead, they keep him, which is going to be pivotal given what he can do with the ground game and that whole area. And considering who they hired at offensive coordinator, it might be very needed. We'll talk about that in a second. Next, defensive line coach Terrell Williams. He leaves after just 1 year. He gets promotion to go to New England to be the Patriots' new defensive coordinator, reuniting with Vrabel, who he coached with in Tennessee before. Now, Dan Campbell had talked about what a good job the defensive line coaches had done. They also moved on. I have to look up this name. I apologize, but they moved on from a defensive line assistant as well in this. But yeah, Terrell Williams. What do you think?
And bummer to lose him, but you can't say it's the end of the world when he was only here 1 year. He seemed like a good hire the previous season, in the off season, and then yeah, the defensive line. It was kind of hard to know how good of work he did because every single person he coached got injured, but he did his best, and when the guys were healthy, they were performing very well. Hutchinson in particular, so I think he did a seemingly decent job, and now he gets a promotion. There's nothing really the Lions can do about that. Just have to, again, reload. That's the way it goes. And anytime you lose coordinators or there's coaching turnover around the league, there are going to be new opportunities. And the price of being a successful franchise is people want your coaches to be head coaches and coordinators elsewhere, and you can't keep them all satisfied in house.
Yep. And so the Lions also moved on from assistant defensive line coach Cameron Davis. They basically just reset that position. As you said, everyone got hurt, but it is worth noting that Hutchinson was playing his best football at the start of the season under Williams there. So maybe it's worth noting. But they replace him with Casey Rogers, who takes a lateral move to go from Tampa Bay to Detroit. And the Lions, they also did interview the Bucks linebacker coach for their defensive coordinator job. Seemed like a lot of buzz from the Tampa defensive staff. Maybe week two made a real impression on them. But Casey Rogers, he obviously has worked with guys like Vita Vea and more recently Kalijah Cansey in developing him. He is fairly highly regarded. I know Aaron Glenn has talked about him in glowing terms in the past. Dan Campbell obviously thinks the world of him. That's why he hired him. Do you have any takes on this one?
I don't like the way he spells his first name. It's not pleasant. Kacy, very odd. Beyond that, I don't know. Seems like a good hire. Like it's position coaches. It's hard to exactly drill down what their impacts are. You have to kind of trust the head coach that's hiring them and take solace in positive things that are said about him. And Rodgers and Campbell go pretty far back. He was a coach with Dallas, defensive tackle and defensive line coach in the mid 2000s when Campbell was there as a player. And then they saw each other again in Miami, where Rodgers was the defensive line coach, while Campbell was getting his feet wet in coaching as a tight ends coach. Casey Rodgers had left by the time Campbell was the interim after Joe Philbin was fired in 2015, but enough familiarity is built up there that you think Campbell should have a known commodity, and that's kind of the story of some of these hires. The ones they've gone outside of House 4, yeah, it's outside the building, but they have connections with Campbell, so he knows what he's getting, and that's a good thing. And since Rodgers was in Tampa Bay, seems to have done a pretty good job with their defensive line. I mean, Vita Vea, obviously the big name there, but they had some other pretty darn good players. If you recall, the Super Bowl they won was really a lot on the defensive line that absolutely terrorized Patrick Mahomes nonstop for the entire 60-minute game. So hiring the guy who coached that positional group is fine with me.
Yeah. And look, it's a pretty simple job. Have Hutchinson continue to be elite. Have Ali McNeil when he comes back continue to be very good. Have DJ Reader continue to be very good. And you have to develop probably one rookie edge guy to be a good, solid contributor on the outside. Like, the Lions have the talent. You just need someone to put them in the right positions.
Yeah, and that's the other side of the being a successful franchise means people want to poach your coaches thing. Is that being a successful franchise also means that when your coaches get poached, it's easier to poach someone else's because you can say to Casey Rogers or whoever, "Hey, don't coach these Pro Bowl caliber players," and a lot of guys will be very interested in taking that offer because it's an easy way to bolster your resume and move up the ladder further. So it's one of those things in sports how a lot of times losing begets more losing and winning begets more winning. So Lions are enjoying those fruits for the first time in a long time.
Yep. And to go back to Johnson and Glenn, I think it was the first time the Lions have had both coordinators hired. Or sorry, the Lions had only ever had,
Any
I believe,
coordinators, yeah.
yeah, I think they had only ever had one coordinator that had been hired as a head coach in their existence, and now they lose two more to in one off season within a week. So I mean, it just speaks to how good the staff has been. But we'll just see. And look, the next generation of the staff, if the Lions keep winning, they'll get hired too. They'll get these opportunities too. So it's a cause and effect thing. Moving on now, the defensive coordinator spot. This was the first spot that they filled, and they stay in house. Kelvin Shepard ends up getting the nod and gets promoted to defensive coordinator. Sean Dion Hamilton gets promoted from assistant linebackers coach to linebackers coach to take over for Shepard. Now, both of these guys, good coaching prospects. Lions keep them in house, and Shepard, he had been groomed for this role for at least the last 2 years, probably since he came to Detroit in general. Aaron Glenn spoke, I believe, in December about how Shepard he thought was pretty much ready to take on a defensive coordinator role, and Glenn had been mentoring him for some time. I know Colton Pouncey of The Athletic wrote about that kind of dynamic back in 2022, talking about how Glenn was encouraging Shepard to take more responsibility and put more on his plate so that he could develop and become ready for this role when Glenn would eventually leave. So this is the extension that the Lions wanted to maintain some of their defensive principles. I know you have your issues with that, but they want to maintain continuity. So here we are.
Yeah, and I wasn't necessarily super opposed for maintaining continuity in your principles. I would like Shepard to just add a little more variation to third down packages, to their coverages, that sort of thing, and hopefully he can do that. In terms of his resume since he's been in Detroit, I think it looks pretty good. He was linebackers coach from 2022 to 2024, which is a period that saw him and the Lions in generally get much, much better play out of Alex Anzalone. It's one of those things that sometimes gets forgotten about in his rise to cult hero among the fan base, in that he sucked his first year and a half. Detroit. He was really not good when he came over from New Orleans, and he's gotten way, way better, and that's positive. Also in that period is Jack Campbell going from quite a rough rookie year in a number of ways to a much stronger sophomore season, and Malcolm Rodriguez was playing really good football before he got injured. Derek Barnes has pitched in over his time with the Lions, so I think their development at linebacker has been as strong as anywhere on the team. So the hiring the linebackers coach to be the DC is on paper a pretty good fit, and hopefully he can add a few new fresh ideas and build on what Glenn was already doing.
And to touch on Rodriguez for a second, because there was the infamous Hard Knocks clips where
Yeah.
Rodriguez, as a rookie, was outperforming everyone, and Kelvin Shepard in a meeting was talking to everyone. He was like, "This is nothing against you, Rodriguez. You've been playing your ass off, but are you guys really going to let me start a rookie?" And he like kind of as an open challenge to his guys. So he's very well respected, both within the room and without. There was an outpouring of support for him from former Lions players and just people that are in the NFL community. So just speaks to how highly regarded he is. And then on the other side of the ball, a few days later, sorry, before that, Antoine Randall was hired as the Bears wide receiver coach and assistant head coach. He gets a little promotion, joins Ben Johnson in Chicago. JT Barrett was hired as their QB coach. He gets a promotion going from assistant QB coach in Detroit. He follows Ben Johnson, which was expected. These guys are going to take coaches. And then the surprise was the Lions, contrary to what we all believed would happen. They do not stay in house for the offensive coordinator role, but they do go with a familiar name to them, John Morton, who was the Broncos pass game coordinator for the past 2 seasons. He was in Detroit for 1 year in 2022, and now he's back in Detroit as the successor to Ben Johnson. Now, it has to be mentioned that Campbell credited Morton with helping the Lions develop a lot of their passing concepts and some principles that they maintained after he left. And now he's back. He had one stint as an offensive coordinator in the NFL. He had another one at USC. He has had a very long career coaching mostly wide receivers and being a pass game coordinator. And when he was with the Jets, the reason he was let go is because he didn't run the ball enough and he was passing too much, which, I mean, you can also just say the Jets were bad because they were, and he got a lot out of that roster. I think all of the players on that offense ended up having career years. So you could view this as a positive, negative. There, you could find the storyline you want to find depending on how you feel about this. But in a vacuum, John Morton, OC, instant reaction.
Yeah. One thing to point out for people who perhaps are not as familiar with this person, this is not Johnny Morton, the Lions wide receiver who was pretty good in the 90s. A little confusing that the Lions are hiring a John Morton and it's not him, especially because Johnny Morton was a wide receiver, and John Morton coaches wide
Coach wide
receivers.
receivers,
They are
yeah.
different. They are different people. So let's get that one on the record real quick. Um, as for Morton himself, a guy with familiarity with Campbell, as we mentioned, having been on the staff briefly in the past. What I like about him in particular is the collection of coaches that he's worked under. The first one that raised my eyebrow was San Diego in 2005. That's University of San Diego, and people may recall that that was Jim Harbaugh's first coaching stop as a head coach, where he had immense success. Then, after 1 year in San Diego, he moves to New Orleans with the Saints under, of course, Sean Payton at the beginning of his tenure. Then he goes to USC under Pete Carroll in the late 2000s. Then he goes back to Jim Harbaugh at San Francisco from 2011 to 2014. Then back to Sean Payton from 2015 to 2016. I mean, that is a really good collection of coaches, some of the absolute best of this era. And that gives a really nice collection of names that he can say that he worked with, and as a result, he gives you some belief. Question over how he'll do as a pretty much first-time play caller. I mean, he worked as a pass game coordinator with the Broncos the last few years. 1 year as offensive coordinator for the Jets under Todd Bowles. So a little bit of play calling experience, but not a ton. All that said, most of the places he's been, there've been a good bit of success. What Denver did with Bo Nix this year was pretty good. A lot of people were surprised at how much they were able to get out of him as a rookie. So that's another, in theory, feather in Morton's cap. So it's a nice resume at face value, but can't have too much belief just because we haven't totally seen it yet. But that said, I'm okay with it overall. We'll see how it goes. Again, a guy with experience working with Campbell and this staff, and I imagine it will be not just a Morton show. It'll be him with Fraley, with
Hmm.
Engstrand, and they'll all be pitching in. So I don't think this is going to be a huge departure from what they had going already.
Well, we'll get to. Well, I guess I should mention the might not be with Engstrand because it sounds like the Jets are circling in on him as the offensive coordinator pick over there. So Engstrand, after getting passed over here in Detroit, he might go
Yeah,
chase that job.
and that's possible. And if he does that, so be it. I'm just putting Engstrand on the record now simply because they talked about how
Yeah.
Morton worked well with Engstrand the first time. So if
Mhm.
Engstrand sticks around, then you would expect a pretty cooperative environment. But he very well may still be poached. We'll see what happens there.
Exactly. So yeah, at the time of recording, it hasn't happened yet. I would expect that it probably happens yet because we haven't really heard too many names associated with the Jets job. But just have to wait and see. Now, as for Morton, I think the things that we know is he is big on the screen game, big on the play action game, and big on the occasional deep shot. We saw with Denver, Marvin Mims became just a rock star down the field using his speed and explosiveness. And Bo Nix was that's how they opened their playoff game against the Bills. Is a huge shot from Nix to Mims in the end zone. Or actually, maybe it wasn't Mims. It might have been someone else. But anyways, he loves the deep shots. He loves the explosive passes, and he also will utilize screens. And then you hope, well, you also expect Dan Campbell's influence, Hank Fraley's influence, the talent the Lions have with the run game. That influence will win out to balance things out a little bit. So you maintain some continuity with someone who helped design the passing game, which is going to be familiar to Jared Goff, and Jared Goff familiar with him, which is probably the most important relationship there is how do Goff and Morton mesh. That is going to be, I think, bringing more of a pass focused coordinator helps Jared Goff, and then you have the other influences to figure out the run game. So all in all, should be pretty solid. I mean, to start the year, it might be a little bit worse than we are hoping for, and it'll just look better come playoff time than you do in September. That's all that really matters.
Yeah, there will probably be some kinks on both sides of the ball that will need to be worked through with some of the turnover, but still have Dan Campbell at the top. Won't be too much of a deviation, and as things get worked out, you hope by the midpoint of the season that it will start to run pretty smoothly.
Exactly. So, with that being said, that is the coaching updates as of this recording. If more happen, we'll talk about them next week. But now we're going to flip over to talk about the first half of our season in review. Going to be focusing on the offensive side of the ball. Now, this isn't necessarily going to be the most structured thing in the world. We do have a couple of picks for like MVP, breakout, disappointment, all that. But to start with, the Lions offense number one in the NFL in scoring. They were very good all year. They were, I mean, historically good in the regular season and in the playoffs. They, as we've mentioned, they put up over 500 yards and 31 points. They were fantastic all year long. So just in a vacuum, I guess. What were your overarching thoughts on this offense this season? And just yeah, I don't know.
It was a good offense. It really had a couple rough weeks to start, and then after that, the rough weeks were really about finishing drives. They were
Mm-hmm.
still moving the ball well to start the season. They just had some trouble paying it off in the beginning, and then from that point forward, it was pretty much dominant. And there were a couple games, like the one against the Texans, where they weren't as sharp, and people will say the playoff game, which maybe, but that was mostly a golf issue. And again, they scored 31 points and got over 500 yards in a playoff game, so you can't really be that negative on the performance in that game. It was a great offense, and it had so many weapons, so many different ways it could beat you. They were strong on the ground. They were a great passing offense. They had four different players with 1,000 scrimmage yards, something like that. Um, and their second year tight end had a relatively disappointing year, yet still had like 600 some yards receiving and was top 10 in the league in categories. It was incredibly prolific, and it carried the team as far as it really could. The defense trailing off in the second half with the injuries, offense had to take more and more and more of a load, and it got them a long way. And it wasn't quite enough in the end with the way things went, but it's hard not to give very high grades to almost everyone involved with this unit.
Yeah, and look, when in our season preview back at the end of training camp, we had highlighted that this offense should be elite. It should be very good. They have one of the best offensive lines. They have a really good quarterback. They have really good running backs, really good receivers. It was just contingent on Jameson Williams breaking out, which he did, Jared Goff continuing to be good, which he was, and the offensive line being elite. Now, the offensive line, I will say, wasn't as elite as perhaps we were expecting, and that like there's a few individual performances. I think I could still confidently say they are the best run blocking unit in the league, but pass protection was a problem. They gave up a pretty significant pressure rate against four-man rushes, which was surprising. The left side of the line had a bit of a tough season in that department, but Sewell still a rock star. Ragnow, we actually I contrary to what everyone kind of expected, last year we had every week it was the head, shoulders, knees, and toe Ragnow on the injury report every week. This year we didn't have that. He actually, despite the fact that he has an inoperable toe injury, he never popped up on the injury report really at all.
Yeah, somehow Ragnar was the one guy who evaded the
Mm.
injury buzz. I mean, Decker missed a few games predictably, and obviously so many players were ravaged otherwise. But Ragnar had a very healthy year, and the retirement talk seems to have quieted down a bit. He's still only, I think, 28. Maybe turns 29 this year. So, in theory, there's still several more good years in him, and it's nice to see that bounce back because last year, getting through the playoffs, it really did feel like his body was starting to disintegrate a bit. And whatever he did training wise in the off season, it'd probably be a good idea to do that again.
Yeah, so he's 28 right now. He'll be 29 by the start of next season. So, like, you're still on the right side of 30. He should have a good couple years left in him. I do think the Lions should invest in a developmental center, perhaps, but PFF had labeled center as one of the Lions' biggest needs. Like, come on, guys. Like, I don't know what planet you're living on. Ragnow's one of the two or three best centers in the league. So, and he's not going anywhere. But so with that being said, because the Lions have had like overarching, they were just very good. I think it makes more sense to focus on the individual performances. So to start out with, we'll start simple. Offensive MVP. Who's your pick?
I think it has to be Jared Goff, and maybe not the best player. You could probably give that to Sewell or Amon Ra, maybe, or Gibbs. But if we are defining MVP the way a lot of people define it, I think it has to be Goff because the amount of points they scored were directly correlated to Goff games. Like the Houston game where they didn't score that many points, bad Goff game. Start of the year where they weren't paying off drives. What was the story? Well, Goff wasn't very good in those. And then in the playoff game where they turned it over a bunch, it was mostly Goff. So when he was bad, they underachieved a bit. And when he was good, which was most all of the other games, they were pretty much untouchable. And all the pieces around him did their job. And when he was going, it was really special to watch. And he was the difference maker on this unit because everyone else was really just so consistent and reliable for the most part.
I will say I did not necessarily identify MVP the way the league does, so I went a bit of a different direction.
Sure.
I
Go ahead.
I I did go with Jameer Gibbs because at the end of the
Yep.
day, this was the best running back season the Lions have seen since Barry Sanders was a player. And Gibbs had just a touch under 2,000 yards, 20 total touchdowns. He was one of the two or three, probably the second best running back in the league behind Saquon Barkley, who hit 2,000 rushing yards and is going to the Super Bowl right now. We have seen kind of a resurgence in running back value as a result of Gibbs and Barkley and Henry and these elite guys that can truly change an offense and the way it runs. We've seen even in games where Goff isn't playing at his best, Gibbs was able to kind of keep the engine running and make things happen on his own. And for how dynamic he is, and in the second half of the year, he emerged more as a receiver. After I complained about it, I immediately had to look like an idiot. So thank you, Ben Johnson, for that. But Gibbs, very, very good running back. That's underselling him. Elite running back, the best running back the Lions have had since Barry, and he should be elite for a very, very long time. And he really does take a lot of pressure off of Goff's shoulders if he is able to drive the offense kind of on his own, which we saw in that Week 18 Vikings game where Gibbs just had a crazy game and won that game offensively kind of on his own. So Jahmyr Gibbs is my pick. Moving on, breakout player of the year. Who do you got?
I assume it will probably be Jameson Williams for both of us, but
Yep.
maybe you'll go in a different direction. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it has to be JMO because everyone else pretty much I think you could make a case for Gibbs because I think his game did go to another level, particularly in the period when Montgomery was injured, and we just saw how dangerous he could be as a weapon. That said, the biggest jump relative to the prior season was definitely JMO because Porta was good last year. Amon-Ra was good last year. JMO last year was kind of a one-trick pony. He'd get a catch or two a game, but wasn't majorly involved. They'd give him reverse, maybe a deep shot here or there, but he wasn't really a reliable every down receiver who was a big factor in the Lions' pass game. And this year, he absolutely was. And he started the year really strong with some deep bombs, including the one in week 1 against the Rams, where he got held and still absolutely cooked the cornerback for a touchdown. Then he had a deep bomb the next week against the Bucks, and it felt like, well, here's this presence now in our offense consistently. And then there were a lot of weeks where he didn't have the deep balls, but he was still getting 4 or 5 catches, and he was reliably making contested catches in tight windows, taking on contact, getting some yards after catch, and that was all in addition to the screen game and the reverses. And he took one to the house in the playoffs. Absolutely developed into a really credible number 2 weapon outside at wide receiver next to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And maybe there's still more there. It wasn't a perfect year. There were off the field shenanigans again, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. But he made incredible progress, and it's pretty hard to ignore that.
Yeah. So Jameson Williams, who is also my pick, finishes the year 15 games played because he had the 2 game suspension. He finishes with 58 receptions, 1,001 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 drops, and 91 total targets. Which is, I mean, the receptions, yards, targets, all higher than I think even the more optimistic projections. If you had told anyone he would have 45 catches for 750 yards and 5 touchdowns, I think everyone would have viewed that as a success. He blew that out of the water, crossing 1,000 yards for the first time in his career. He also added 11 attempts on the ground for 61 yards and a touchdown. Actually, funny enough, I just realized that the 61-yard rush he had in the playoff game for a touchdown matched his season total of rushing yards, despite the 11 attempts. But he's a super explosive player, one of the 2 or 3 fastest guys in the entire league. He could take the top off the defense. He could just outrun everyone. He is a very dynamic threat. And we talk about John Morton and his proficiency for the pass game specifically. I'm very excited to see what JMO brings in that department. Now to go in a different direction, because we have had so much good to say about the Lions offense, but biggest disappointment of the season. Who do we have here?
I assume this will be between the both of us again, but probably Graham Glasgow. That's my. Seems like that has to be the guy that you would pick here. His play regressed pretty significantly. It was a major issue in the playoff game, particularly in pass protection. There were many other incidents over the course of the season. He just didn't quite have it, particularly in the pass protection side, but there were also issues on the ground. Was frequently the weak link in the offensive line, and it was an offensive line that, as a whole, regressed in the pass pro phase. I think you could make a case for Taylor Decker, although I think Decker had some creaky moments last year too, where he just kind of gets beat by a speed rusher around the edge. Glasgow, though, is the one with the biggest drop off in his play, and it definitely makes me wonder whether he will be back next year.
Yep, and look, that is also my pick is Graham Glasgow. I did consider Taylor Decker just because he did also have a bit of a down year, and perhaps he's just kind of hit that age cliff where his play is going to start to regress a little bit. But regardless, Decker at least still provided pretty stable play at tackle, which is a more important position, so I don't want to fault him too much. He's always been a guy that's kind of gotten beat by speed rushers, and if there's a really good edge rusher on the other team, we saw that against the Vikings with Grenard. Sometimes Decker's just going to get beat by good guys. It's not a bad thing. Sometimes like great players can make great plays. Not everyone is Penei Sewell. Not everyone is one of the best tackles in the league, and you just got to take what you can get there. So the stability of wins out for me. Graham Glasgow moving from right guard to left guard this season seemed to be a major problem. I don't know what the specific reason is, but it just didn't work out, and he was not as good as we were expecting him to be, and certainly not as good as the Lions needed him to be in that playoff game. But I don't know what the Lions are going to do there. I think they'll probably just keep him. I would not be shocked if the line that you saw in the playoff game, which was from left to right, Decker, Glasgow, Ragnow, Christian Mahogany, and Sewell, I wouldn't be shocked if that's your starting line week 1 of 2025. So I don't know, but Glasgow definitely not his best season, and I'm sure he probably wants to have a bit of a better year next year. Now, those were the three categories I had highlighted. Were there any other kind of individual awards you wanted to give out?
Um, I would give out a unsung hero award to Tim Patrick, whose
Yeah.
play did tail off at the end of the year. That's fine. He provided a lot of stability early in the season, particularly weeks when Sam Laporta was kind of disengaged from the
Mm.
offense. They weren't giving him catches, and Patrick stepped up and he played a good role through a crucial portion of the season. The Lions probably did have real wide receiver depth problems if he didn't step up, and particularly then when Raymond got injured later in the year. So it was really important that he was able to pitch in and give him a solid season on a very respectable salary. So we shouldn't forget his contributions. That would be my pick. You have anything you want to recognize?
If we're doing it unsung hero, just to be different, I think honestly, I would probably give it to David Montgomery because the amount of disrespect that's been hurled his way in light of the Gibbs breakout, like after Montgomery went down and Gibbs started going off for like 150 yards and 2 touchdowns a week, everyone is like, "Why are you giving Montgomery the ball? Why is he playing so much?" And look, David Montgomery is just such a workhorse. Like that run against the Seahawks he had on a little screen where he
Oh,
catches the ball, instantly trucks a defender, and then breaks like three more tackles and runs for like 50 yards. Like that is like he is just so or overtime against the Rams in week 1, where David Montgomery basically on his own just drove down the field with the offensive line. They just drove down the field and said, "We're winning this game." It's such a nice change of pace. You always have to have someone in the backfield that brings a little something different from your starter. Even if Montgomery's role does diminish a little bit, he probably won't have 15 carries a game next year. He probably has 9 or 10, and Gibbs will be more the 1A, Monty will be more the 1B. But don't forget about David Montgomery because he is still a very, very good running back in this league.
yeah, and I thought the first month of the season or so that Montgomery was outperforming Gibbs over that stretch. I thought Montgomery was playing the best that I had seen him play. He was showing off his speed and evasion and then marrying that with the tough running and ability to fall forward. He was identifying the right cuts with, I think, more regularity than Gibbs was at that point. So we shouldn't lose sight of how good he was for a lot of the year. And then Gibbs really turned it on, and the injury happened. And it's a great problem to have
Yep.
when you're kind of deciding between who's better of these two really good players. And in hindsight, despite how much it stung from a sort of team culture standpoint at the time, swapping out Jamal Williams for David Montgomery was one of the great wins that Brad Holmes ever had as Lions general manager.
The tweet that will live in infamy is David Montgomery and Jameer Gibbs is not a significant upgrade from Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift. One of the well, yeah, look, and I mean, Jameer Gibbs is the uh, the rumors going into the draft this year are that running backs are going to be overdrafted as a reaction to the Saquons and Jameer Gibbses of the world. Good, because not every running back is going to be that good. And if teams want to react to that, it just means other players are going to fall down the board. Sonic and Knuckles are here to stay. They'll be here next year, and I'm sure we will get plenty of highlights from them next year as well. Aside from that, do you have any other notes on the offense that you wanted to bring up before we wrap?
One thing I think I will mention, just because I've seen it come up some places, but I really don't think moving forward that the trick plays will completely vanish from the offense like people seem to think. I mean, Dan Campbell, remember his first year in Detroit when he was for the first half, Anthony Lynn was calling plays, and then the second half of the year, Campbell was calling plays. They were still a pretty tricky team then. I mean, especially on special teams, they did a lot of fake punts, onside kicks. Like that clearly is a streak from Campbell, and I think Ben Johnson was given leeway to draw up the cool stuff. But I have every reason to think that will still be a staple of the offense moving forward, maybe in a different way or a little less creative than maybe it was under Ben
Mm-hmm.
Johnson. But I struggle to believe Campbell's going to abandon that because it's just been a consistent thing under him in the aggressive decision making and desire to kind of grind yards out in different ways that teams aren't expecting. And I'm bringing it up now because that was one of the fun parts of this year's offense. Was again the trick plays. We'll always remember the falling down play against the Bears, the numerous hook and ladders this season. The first
Mm-hmm.
one against Arizona, the Amon Ra Philly special to Jared Goff in the Seattle game. David Montgomery throwing a touchdown pass against Tennessee. There was a touchdown to Skipper right in the Buffalo game.
Yep.
I'm trying to remember. Oh, there was the Penei Sewell play with the Bears on Thanksgiving. I think I've got most all of them. I don't think there were any in the playoffs. Wink, wink. So it was a fun year in that regard, and it was a great offense to watch already. And having those fun plays makes it better. I think they will still be a staple of the offense, but maybe not as flamboyant. So if this was the peak of that under Campbell, then it's something I will remember fondly.
Yeah, look, it was a ton of fun, and I do think there will be a decrease in uniqueness of trick plays. I don't think you're going to see things from the stumble bum side of the world, but
Sure.
um, my honestly my favorite like not even trick play because it wasn't a trick play, but the Lions, it was just like a 1 yard run to Jameer Gibbs, and they thought it would work because Penei Sewell went on a fake end around, and the Niners just had the Lions made trick plays so normal that Penei Sewell on a fake end around drew zero reaction from the defense. So I like the offense will always have that creative element. I'm sure that the players like probably get involved in that quite a bit. Like Amon Ra, I'm sure will keep the hook and ladder streak going because that worked so well this year. I think the hook and ladders are here to stay for a little bit. Maybe we'll see a Penei Sewell pass get completed next year. Who knows? If Penei Sewell ever throws a touchdown, I the world will find peace for a moment because that would just an offensive line passing touchdown would be just amazing.
There's still the potential for more if John Morton wants to have
Mhm.
some fun with it and keep building. There's so many talented players in this team who can do different things, and everyone wants to be involved with it. So, again, hopeful it will continue. I'm glad that it gave us the Dan Skipper lined up at wide receiver meme that circulates on football Twitter. It's that's that's my thought about the offense in general. But really, the Lions team is that it had a unfortunate ending in the playoffs, but not a lot of teams are more fun to watch
Mhm.
in a week in, week out basis than the Lions, and particularly watching this offense is just really fun. And the players seem to get along. I mean, look, the Eagles are a great team. They may win the Super Bowl. The Lions don't have drama like the Eagles. There's no AJ Brown reading a book or feuding with Hurts or
Nick
the end of their
Sirianni.
season. Sirianni and Patricia the previous year, like the Eagles are so talented that it overcomes the weird vibes. The Lions
Mhm.
are always good vibes, and that's something to appreciate, particularly on offense.
Yeah, so look, I think the worst thing that happened this season, and from a trick play standpoint, is Debo Samuel caught a touchdown in Week 17, which he got his second passing or receiving touchdown of the year. And I so badly wanted to end the year saying that Dan Skipper and Jared Goff caught the same amount of touchdowns as Deebo Samuel. But alas, it is what it is. But with that being said, that is where we're going to wrap the show. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. You can find us at Payne and Drain on Twitter. You can find me at ZachPayne41, Alex at Alex_Drain. If you've listened this far, make sure you leave us a review on podcasting platforms or like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. We'll see you guys next week for a Super Bowl preview, recapping any Lions news that happens, and a defense recap as well. So we'll see you guys then. Take care. Cheers.